Okay, originally this video was going to be about proving that Gaster is forgotten and the toxicity currently in the Undertale theorist community. But I accidentally ended up quite possibly solving one of the greatest mysteries of all of Undertale. As for Gaster being forgotten, usually I withhold this info till the end, but I'm just going to show it right here now. Everyone knows about the Gaster card by now. It was part of a set of fan images. When Toby hired said fan to make these images into official cards, there was never a Gaster card. He was completely left out of the group, and the Gerson card was made in his place as the Hermit Arcana when Wave 2 dropped. When the creator of the cards, Dog Bomber, made a post on Tumblr about the new cards, they had this to say about Gaster's replacement. Looks like Gerson's in the Hermit spot now. Who was it before? I can't remember. Oh well. Simple, straight-to-the-point confirmation that Gaster being forgotten is indeed a part of the narrative, even if not specified in Undertale. And while we're at it, Deltarune and Gaster have been discovered to exist since at least 2015 on the old website, but most likely have existed even before that. It's sad how quickly one person can influence an entire community's understanding of something. You'll see people everywhere trying to correct each other on how Gaster being forgotten was never official and is just fanon. And that's a big issue right now in the theorist portion of the Undertale and Deltarune fandom. This weird group of anti-theorists and overzealous theorists with extreme bias for the theories they believe. I too was one of those people before. I once made an entire video just to debunk one theory and give a middle finger to Reddit. I think Half-Bred Chaos says it the best. It's not about being right 100% of the time, it's about having fun and running wild with creative possibilities. Even if a lot of the theories we make are completely wrong, they often point us in the right direction or bring attention new details we haven't considered before. And at very least, if you're gonna take up the mantle of, actually-ing people with no good reason, you at very least need to actually know what you're talking about. All these people think they know Undertale's story, and that we're misunderstanding it somehow. Undertale's story is so complex, to this day, people are making long videos discussing what it's really about. The only thing we can say for sure Undertale is about is the morality of fighting in video games, since Toby Fox said so in an interview. And as a man unironically involved in a government conspiracy, including prophetic dreams about Deltarune, if anyone has a right to tell someone what Undertale and Deltarune is really about, it's me. But Gaster being forgotten might only be part of the story. There is some evidence that some otherworldly force is actually removing Gaster from the world and from people's minds. Gaster exudes strong "he who shall not be named" energy. Typing his name will result into the game resetting the intro. The wrong number song caller, who is almost certainly calling for Gaster, is cut off by himself before he can finish his name. Sans' iconic Gaster Blaster has an official pin, but removed Gaster from the name. Gaster's beta design is named Redacted, and to be redacted means to censor something by the government or some force of authority, and its sprite appears to have a giant paintbrush weaved over it to conceal its identity. While Gaster's final sprite is called Mystery Man, Gaster in lore was responsible for creating the most important machine in the underground. His existence shouldn't be a mystery. He had to have been erased from records in some way or another. A lot of people used the dialogue that Asgore took a long time to hire a new royal scientist as proof that Gaster wasn't forgotten. But is it really? I mean, wouldn't that make sense if he forgot? If we go with the idea that Gaster was actually removed from people's memories, then most likely, Asgore forgot he even had a royal scientist at all, and probably only remembered when he walked outside and saw the core one day. And also, we are going completely off of the word of a Gaster follower, a character who might not even be from this universe since they are alternative versions of pre-existing characters that phase in and out of reality, who most likely have had the same thing happen to them as Gaster. And even still, this is just one follower's assumption for why Asgore took so long to hire a new scientist. Not even a fact that Asgore remembers Gaster. However, I think there's some evidence to say that he did. For one, Asgore doesn't seem fazed by the idea that humans can come back from the dead. A lot of people have assumed that this is because Asgore fought previous humans, but based on placement of armor, I don't think any human actually faced Asgore. Also, Flowey had the most determination in the underground before Frisk, so they wouldn't have had access to save files anyway, unless, like in Undertale Yellow, Flowey actually worked with the humans and gave them access. And if that is the case, that would explain how they would be able to come back sometimes, but eventually permanently died. Flowey just got sick of them and stopped giving them access. But considering Gaster is implied to be quite close to Asgore, and Gaster is our #1 source of otherworldly knowledge, perhaps Gaster has exchanged his knowledge with Asgore too. There's one other big piece of evidence that they were close, but we'll get to that later. The biggest piece of info relating to being forgotten is Sans' Don't Forget photo, which contains 3 smiling figures. This dialogue is only revealed after talking to a secret Gaster follower, so he's connected by default. This becomes the main theme in Deltarune, so it's obviously very important. In the mystery newsletter, Highly Likely to be Gaster, he talks about how he forgot someone who needs help, and that it's ironic for him to do so. I think there's many ways to interpret this dialogue, so I won't say exactly how this connects, but it definitely does. Now to the big reason I made this video in the first place. A theory called Writing on the Walls by Sock Muppet, and Gaster's connection to the True Lab. I see you Alpha stands angrily typing right now, so let me at least finish before you jump to defend a fictional character. We'll start with everything that wasn't said in that video. Starting with the entries, there's the infamously missing entry 17. Of course, if there's ever an obviously missing page in a story, people will hunt for it. And this is exactly what Toby intended. The normal one is just an unused string of text that tells you how the amalgamates form. Toby probably removed it because it was better to let the player put the puzzles to get pieces together themselves and wait till the end for Alphys to say it. Then there's the much more known entry 17, room_Gaster. I'm not going to read entry 17 since you've probably heard it a million times. But Toby specifically had this room translated and put in the Undertale Legends of Localization book, proving that it is part of the Undertale experience. Which means Alphys's 17 is non-canon scrapped content, while Gaster's is canon, and while not accessible by normal play, it's considered a valid secret room in Undertale. Well, if one entry in a series presumably made by the same person is made by Gaster, wouldn't the others also be made by Gaster? Or at very least, if one entry wasn't made by Alphys, then it opens the possibility for a few other entries to also not be made by Alphys. If this was not the intention, Toby easily could have made it entry 66 or something, because Gaster has much stronger connections to the number 6 than the number 17. And, to make matters even worse, half the True Lab entries are written in normal punctuation, while the other half are in lowercase. And while some have said that that doesn't mean anything, and that just shows that sometimes Alphys was more depressed and not trying very hard to write correctly, that doesn't tell us anything. We already knew Alphys is depressed. There's no reason to add this detail. And as for Alphys's entry 17, a lot of people make the mistake of treating unused content as canon. And not only does that conflict with confirmed canon entry, but if unused content in the True Lab is still canon, then that means that the True Lab is canonically a sentient entity that can true wall labs laughing. Okay, jokes aside, we've seen amalgamates mimic everything from save points to fridges, so there's no reason they couldn't mimic a wall too. Gaster's entry 17 ends with, "What do you two think?" So that means that at least 2 other characters were present in the True Lab during the making of this. Furthermore, Alphys says she knows Sans at the end of The True Pacifist, but when Papyrus asks how, she gets nervous before Sans jokes that everyone knows him. When calling Papyrus around the normal lab, after some Papyrus shenanigans, Sans says he wouldn't rule out the possibility that there are dogs in the lab. And when in the lab, Papyrus says he's seen the bag of dog food in Sans' room before, hinting that Sans has been in the True Lab and fed Endogeny. Finally, in Genocide, Sans says, "Our reports have shown a massive anomaly in the space-time continuum, so somewhere there's a secret group that monitors timelines that Sans is a part of." And Alphys exclaims that she has done research into alternate universes, and that they do exist. So all signs point to Sans, Alphys, and Gaster working together in the True Lab. Now back to Sock Muppet's video. I'd like you to watch it first since it's really well made and cinematic, but to summarize, he believes that Gaster was the one first assigned to experiment with determination, back before they had any human souls, and wrote the first normal punctuated entries. He successfully injected a few monsters with determination which granted them immortality. Kara was taken to the True Lab to be operated by Gaster, and its death video was taken on accident from a security camera in the True Lab. Gaster's entry 17 was also caught by accident in a dark room from another security camera. Years later, Alphys shows Asgore Metaton, which gets her hired as the new royal scientist. Everything you already know happens, and Alphys writes the lowercase entries. Flowey mimics Papyrus's voice to send you to the True Lab, fakes some notes, and rearranges the entries in the True Lab. Also, he says that Gaster and Alphys both injected different flowers with determination, but I honestly lost track of what he was trying to say, and I just ignore that part. So, you may have noticed an issue here. Instead of one big solid theory, we have a bunch of mini-theories with varying legitimacy. And when one idea sounds absurd, people will start to discredit the other ideas. And since Sock Puppet called Alphys a fraud, people wanted to discredit it. It seems common for people to want to call a theory wrong or dumb, not because the evidence is faulty, but because something in the video they personally disliked. You'd think in the 8 years of being called a toxic fandom, Undertale fans would be mature enough to not defend fictional characters, but no. Some people respectfully disagreed with the video and moved on, but as soon as Dorked made a response video to it, which no one asked for, a group of toxic Alphys stans emerged from the void to make insulting comments and act like Alphys is the one who gets unnecessary hate. Search Gaster on Reddit and tell me which of the two royal scientists are the ones that get unnecessary hate. The only people I've seen hate on Alphys weren't even a part of the fandom. If anything, this mindset is only going to make people like Alphys less. Alphys is literally a dork who loves theories and fanfiction. She would absolutely support a crazy theory like this. But instead, the Alphys fandom only took her trait of biasly reviewing something super negatively because it's not the same as what you like. The fact that Dorked needs to put a disclaimer to not harass the theorists says all you need, really. It also seems unfair to target this one particular theory and not address the other popular theories for years that Sans wrote the lowercase entries, despite that making literally no sense. Basically, had this man not said a single innocent word, people would have moved on without a care in the world, and it just would sit in the hall of other crazy Undertale theories. Of course, that being said, I still have a lot of problems with it. First and foremost, Dogami and Dogaressa having determination can immediately be deconfirmed since they don't melt upon death. And when they said we have to experiment with monster souls, that was because they didn't have all the 7 human souls yet and needed to compensate with monster souls, not that they didn't have any human souls yet. And while I do like the concept of someone years later having to follow up someone whose work and skill was critically acclaimed and failing to meet those standards, since it's a struggle a lot of people go through, I don't think that's what's happening here. I definitely think that Sans, Alphys, and Gaster all worked in the lab at the same time. But I'm not here to poke holes. Let's talk about all the things that are definitely canon and I will combine with my own theories. The final Kara tape absolutely happened in the True Lab. There would be no other reason to play the lab ambience and have the room be dark. Gaster operating on Kara would explain why these two have so many connections despite one only being a human child and having very little chance of actually being associated with Gaster. Who knows what experiments Gaster may have tried to bring it back to life, and what effect it later had on its body. And if Asgore's first instinct when his child was dying was to put them in the care of Gaster, it would solidify a bond and trust that I've theorized they have. And while not said in the video, Flowey being made by Gaster could also make sense given Flowey has even more uncanny references to Gaster and knowledge from the beyond. However, you could easily say that Flowey simply gained knowledge of Gaster, perhaps even meeting him, because of how long he's been messing with the game, when he was in control. And Alphys' reaction at the end of the True Pacifist ending is far too personal for Flowey to not be made by Alphys. But Flowey being the Aster Flower is still quite suspicious. Flowey messing with the entries is absolutely canon. There's no other reason for these to turn on when you walk next to them, be completely out of order, and have smiley faces on the Flowey-related entries. Unless True Lab is sentient and True Wall Labs laugh. The Amalgamates also have some unexplained similarities to Gaster, despite not being logical for the Amalgamates to be made by him. It really feels like the entire True Lab is just haunted by Gaster's influence. The memory heads, watching man, everyman, the man in tree shapes in the cold room, and even True Wall Labs laughing. Entry 17 being security cam footage rather than being something metaphorical that we're only seeing, confirms a suspicion I've had for a while. That Entry 17 captures the very moment things went horribly wrong and Gaster was shattered. It may also explain why Alphys doesn't make her own Entry 17. It was such a horrible event that she simply chose to avoid using that number. Plus, look at the entry that comes right before 17. 16 is just someone frantically screaming no, going from lowercase to uppercase. Obviously, you're supposed to assume that this is the moment that the amalgamates melted together, but I think this might mark the very moment that Gaster went from a normal person to the booming godlike voice we hear all over Deltarune, explaining why he doesn't use all caps in the entries like we're used to see him talking. So, what is entry 17 about? Clearly, it's about the darkness from Deltarune. It was used on the Deltarune website in 2015. But why does Gaster randomly go from doing determination experiments to screaming in darkness? And then it hit me. Darkness and determination are explicitly linked. Queen says all you need to make dark fountains is determination. If Gaster harnessed determination in a haphazard manner like we expect him to do, it wouldn't surprise me if Gaster overflowed the thing with determination and ripped open a hole straight to the depths. And guess which room the one monitor with no entry is? The determination extractor room. This is where entry 17 happened. And we've been wondering, why do all these characters overflowing with determination share motifs of Gaster? What if the motif is of determination and darkness? It's clear to me, Gaster has become one with the darkness itself. The menu in the Dark World uses wingdings as icons, and perhaps when the smile sound plays on the phone and in the shelter, it's not because Gaster is literally on the other side, but because the darkness itself is echoing his voice. It's probably a give and take. Some of Gaster's motifs became infused with darkness, like the hands and wingdings, and some of the darkness motifs became infused with Gaster, like melting and cracks. It never made sense to me why in Deltarune monsters can produce their own determination with no consequences, and even more so, why monsters in Undertale can't produce determination when characters like Papyrus are clearly very determined in a literal sense. It's clear to me that Gaster did something completely reality-breaking since he wound up shattered across time and space. Perhaps he left permanent damage on the determination of this reality. In almost every character with determination, they become demented, murderous. That would make sense if a malicious entity had become intertwined with the Force itself, and unstable too, since everything melts. And you may be thinking, why isn't there a dark fountain in the True Lab then? Well, have we ever stopped to think why darkness bursts out into fountains? Toby confirmed King and Queen became more evil just by being next to the fountains. So, some malicious entity has to lie within the fountains in particular. What I'm getting at is the reason the dark fountains burst out is because Darkness Gaster desperately wants to escape. When Gaster opened the first hole, there was no malicious entity in the darkness, so it didn't flood out into the world. It even tracks timeline-wise as entry 17 is the very time that the amalgamates started forming. Before that, everything was fine, and they were successfully brought back to life as normal people. So, after everything, seeing what a mess Gaster had become, Sans and Alpha simply erased Gaster from records. He was not this perfect scientist everyone claimed him to be. He was reckless and insane. His mistake was simply covered up and his blind followers never learned the truth. Alphys took credit for everything, not because she's a fraud, but simply to spare everyone from the knowledge of the tragedy. As memory of Gaster faded from public conscious, and since Alphys would have no reason to assume Frisk would even know who Gaster is, there was simply no reason to come clean with this lie, even after exposing everything else. And as for the out-of-universe stuff, Gaster in merch is often replaced rather than simply removed. There are 2 pictures where he was replaced with a save point, and after what we just learned, it makes sense. He is one with the determination after all. Second is the Gerson card. After Gaster was erased from public conscious, it would make sense that Gerson would become the public figure for the old wise man. Though, ironically, since Gerson has meta-knowledge of the shopkeepers being immune to fighting, it's likely that he got this knowledge from Gaster too. And if you watched my previous theories, you might be asking, how does this fit with the meta-narrative about Gaster being Toby? Well, simply, Toby was once a kid who experimented with ideas, which he eventually stumbled upon something so great he transformed into a god of the game developer world. Toby has felt trapped before. Both trapped in the success of Undertale, scared if making a new game would disappoint people, and at one point, trapped in a sea of despair since deltarune wasn't working out. The darkness does represent deltarune after all. Well, isn't that something? We turned a theory that claims Gaster was some brilliant, perfect scientist whose experiments worked perfectly as intended with Alphys being a fraud failing to retrace his greatness, to a theory being that Gaster is some mad scientist who cursed the very fabric of this universe, and his assistant Alphys having no choice but to take the blame and be unfairly criticized by the public for the hardships that it caused. And to think we still have 2 more Gaster theories before I feel satisfied with moving on to something else. And who knows if Toby will randomly decide to drop new Gaster lore that changes everything yet again.